Also, a shout out to @AlexLokesPhoto because he's one of the few big names in the online film community that seems like he'll die on the Minolta AF Hill. Why yes, yes I will. Hey there friends, Alex Lokes here and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a wonderful camera review for you, and I am of course talking about the Minolta Maxxum 70. This is the camera that I only recently found out about, and it is actually one of the final two film SLRs produced by Minolta. But you know the drill, let's head back to the studio. I'll give you a little bit of background about the camera and give you a brief tour, and I'll meet you back here. The Maxxum 70, also known as the Alpha 70 in Japan or the Dynax 60 in Europe, is an interesting camera as it doesn't really have a direct line from 1985 to 2004. Rather, it simply is an amalgam of all the previous models and the improvements therein. When the Alpha lineup, or Maxxum lineup, first hit markets in 1985, three models denoted by a numerical designator to indicate the target market. The 5000 as an entry-level camera, the 7000 for advanced users, and the 9000 for professionals. Both the entry-level 5000 and the advanced consumer 7000 received updates in 1988 using the I designator. These second-generation Maxxum cameras could be expanded with a card-based system to unlock features. On the 5000i, it provided the photographer with both aperture and shutter priority modes not available on the stock model. A third generation came out in 1992, the XI series, and it included two lower spec models, the 2XI and the 3XI. This allowed Minolta to take the 5XI a little bit closer to that advanced 7XI, giving it a bit more power. But what really set the XI series apart was the introduction of a blistering fast autofocus, and with the appropriate lens, auto zoom functions. The card expansion system continued to be used by the XI system, but by the fourth generation SI cameras, the idea was dropped. But they did integrate the idea of creative modes specifically into the 500 SI, providing consumer photographers the ability to automatically give their images that creative edge without really knowing how to manipulate the exposure settings. But they did have that option, as the 500 SI did include a full set of program, shutter, aperture, and manual modes. The SI series also saw the introduction of the 600 series, with the 600 SI returning the idea of some level of physical controls rather than buttons, menus, and dials. The fifth, and what I thought was originally the final set of cameras from Minolta, the 7, 9, and 5, returned to that original rule of 3. While the Maxxum 7 and 9 are well known, the Maxxum 5 does have its own cult following, and takes advantage of the previous advances of the 7 and the 9, but puts it into a much more compact and affordable body. The Maxxum 70, released in 2004, fits into the niche that once the 600 series occupied, taking the best aspects of the 7, 5, and 9, but in a smaller, easier to use body. And that explains the two names, the Maxxum 70 and the Dynax 60. Production lasted for only 2 years, ending in 2006, when Konica-Minolta decided to shift all their efforts to the digital market, and eventually sold all their cameras to Sony. But let's take a look at the brilliant Maxxum 70. And here it is, the Maxxum 70. This is a brilliant camera. It is absolutely compact, it is super tiny, and that really is the biggest surprise for me, is how small this camera is and how compact. It just puts so much power in such a small little body. Now, for the sake of visibility, I have the old stock lens on here, but we'll talk more about optics later. Let's take a look at this. So, up at the front, you will have your standard lens release button. You also have your EV setting and your flash mode button. Up on the front here, that's your command dial, and I love the fact that they've kept this sort of throwback to older cameras by putting the command dial up here instead of a standard dial across the front or the back. This is the only command dial on the camera, which is a bit of a problem, but again, more on that later. You also have right here is your IR sensor if you have a remote trigger. On the side, you have the release for the film door and your rewind function. It's a little bit indented, so you really have to use your thumbnail to get in there. On the camera back, you have your autofocus manual focus selector switch, an AF activation switch, and your exposure lock. You also have a diopter, which is brilliant for people like me with glasses. Up on the top plate, you got a nice little small LCD screen, and you have your mode dial. And here is also your on-off switch. So you bring it to P, and it'll bring it up, and you can see here, you also got aperture priority, shutter priority, full manual. And then you also have the green P mode if you just want no nonsense shooting. The camera does everything, including popping up the flash. And you have your creative modes right here. On this side, you have, this is really your menu dial. You basically set the thing you want to adjust, you hit the function key, and then make the adjustments here. So, for example, you press ISO, gives you ISO 400. You can manually adjust that. I'll be shooting 100 speed film later. You also have your pop-up flash, and that's actually really nice, but there's no actual protection. This part is still very much available. And the nice part is that I can basically tell the flash, I don't want you to turn on at all, especially in program mode. All right, let's get this film loaded. Best things in life are analog. I'm shooting Adox CHS 102 today. Just goes in like that. And we're ready to go. Let's take her out into the field. Okay, so a relatively simple camera from almost the end of the 35mm era in any major way within the photography market. So where am I today? I am here in Oakville, Ontario, and I'm just outside the downtown in an area I don't really come to that often, but it gives for an interesting look. I have my Maxxum 70. I have it with the 35-70 f4 lens, a favorite of mine. And it's loaded with Adox CHS 102, and I'm going to be developing that in Adox FX39 All right, let's start walking. I can talk to you a little bit about my experience with the camera, okay? Let's head out. Despite its size, the Maxxum 70 is a fun camera to use and much more feature-rich than you might think. It's small, compact, lightweight, and you can carry it around without any second thought or added weight in your camera bag, especially if you have smaller, lighter lenses. In addition to the creative modes and the green P mode, which are great for new photographers, you have access to full program, aperture, shutter priority, and manual mode. The single command dial does make working in manual a bit tricky, but in aperture and shutter priority, you're good. But I love just full program mode, especially with the dead accurate metering system. The autofocus, while fast, can sometimes miss the mark if you're using an older prime lens or a lens with a filter on it, but don't let that stop you. You can easily readjust. You also have access to a ton of custom functions, different metering modes, including matrix, center weighted, and spot. And the viewfinder, although only offering about 85% coverage, still has plenty of good information to help any photographer create excellent images. When it comes to optics for the Maxxum 70, you can use any Minolta A-mount lens, even the modern SSW lenses. Some of them are a bit big that would just look absolutely comical on this, but 90% of the time, if you're buying this camera used, it doesn't come with this lens. In fact, it probably doesn't even come with a prime lens. It comes with this, the Minolta AF Zoom 28 to 100 lens. Not a lot of people like this lens, but since I've talked ad nauseum about every other Maxxum lens out there, I figure for the optical section, I'll talk a little bit about this lens as we continue closer into downtown. All right, let's go. While the Maxxum 70 has decent build quality, the same cannot be said for that 28 to 100mm kit lens. It almost seems that on the optical side, the folks at Konica-Minolta have checked out. The lens looks cheap, feels cheap, it is cheap. Built entirely from plastic, even the lens mounts, but I'm sure there are some metal components in there, but not where they count. The image quality, however, is decent, but don't expect tack-sharp images. The lens performs well between 28 and 50mm, but once you get beyond that 50mm mark, you're going to find the images lose a certain sharpness. Plus, there's some definite fall-off at the corner. The biggest problem is that because of the lower build quality, you'll often find copies in non-functional condition. The weak points of the lens are the mount and the gears that drive the autofocus. While not the best choice, it certainly fits the camera, but honestly, get the 35 to 70mm f4. It'll provide better image quality, better build quality, and a much more compact option for your Maxxum 70. Well, that does it for this camera, and honestly, this camera surprised me how much fun I had with it. There's just something about those late 90s, early 2000s cheap and cheerful SLRs that just make photography so easy and fun. And sure, it doesn't have the same size, weight, or functionality as my Maxxum 9, but sometimes you just want to get out and take pictures. And this camera and lens combination is actually going to be used for next year's Frugal Film project. I just need to find 12 rolls of cheap film. I'm leaning towards Fomapan, maybe 100, 200, or 400, probably between 100 and 400 to be perfectly honest. These cameras are inexpensive on the used market. You can find one with a lens in good, almost new condition for well under $100, usually no more than 50 bucks on eBay. The downside is, of course, it takes CR2 batteries, which are a little pricey, but they do last a long time. So let me know in the comments below, what is your favorite late 90s, early 2000s cheap and cheerful SLR? Are you Minolta, Nikon, Canon, even Pentax? If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, give me a thumbs up, and be sure to hit that bell notification icon so you know when I post new content. Until next time, my name's Alex Laux. Get out there, stay safe. I may not be cheap, but I certainly am easy.